What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Let's Talk Black History with Tay Nicole, the series where we break down powerful stories from Black history that deserve more attention than what it was given. So, today we're talking about something that many people don't realize is a major part of Black history: Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous communities. See, when people think about Latin America, they often imagine Spanish or indigenous culture. But what many people don't realize is that millions of Africans were brought to Latin America during that transatlantic slave trade. And their influence is still deeply present today. Countries like Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico all have long histories of Afro descendants communities. Let's talk about how these cultures developed and why they matter. So, let's start with African roots in Latin America. Between the 1500s and 1800s, millions of Africans were brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade. And most people should know what the transatlantic slave trade is. If you don't know, I'll comment down below and we'll talk about the transatlantic slave trade in another episode. But anyway, many people don't realize that the majority of the enslaved Africans were actually taken to Latin America and the Caribbean, not the United States. Okay? In fact, Brazil alone received more enslaved Africans than any other country in the Americas. These Africans brought languages, religion, music, traditions, food, and cultural practice with them. Okay? Even under brutal conditions, they preserve their identities and traditions. Over time, African cultures blended with the indigenous cultures, and Spanish or Portuguese influences. So, this created the unique identities where, we know as Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous communities. Okay? So let's talk about the Afro-Indigenous Connections, shall we? In many parts of the Americas, African and Indigenous communities interacted closely. Okay? Sometimes they formed alliances to resist colonization and slavery. Okay? So it's like a big old family coming together and banding against slavery. If that what I just said didn't make sense to you. Other times, communities blended through shared culture, family connections, and survival. These communities became known as Afro-Indigenous people. So you can still see strong, independent cultural Afro-Indigenous heritage in parts of Mexico and Colombia. Today, you can still see it, back then and today. For generations, many of these communities preserve traditions that combine African and Indigenous roots together. So, my favorite part: cultural impact of Afro-Latina. So Afro-Latino, I said Latino earlier, I meant to say Latino. culture has had a massive influence on music, food, and traditions across the Americas, right? For example, many musical styles in Latin America are deeply rooted in African rhythms. So, for example, in Brazil, music styles like samba, I think it's pronounced coparia or copeira. I'm sorry, I butchered it. I apologize. Traditions come from African heritage, and by the way, it's going to be spelled out in the captions in case I spelled it wrong. I said it wrong. I'm sorry. In Colombia, rhythms like kubaya were shaped by African drums and indigenous instruments. Across the Caribbean, African culture shaped language, food, dance, and spirituality. These cultural influences eventually spread across the world. Okay, so that's why if you look, that's why if you look around the world, you'll notice so much African culture, Black culture, um, throughout everyone. But anyway, even music, modern music styles today are connected to these traditions. Okay, so this is the part where we talk about the invisible history. For a long time, Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous communities were typically overlooked or erased from official histories, history books, history classes, history lessons. Many countries promoted the idea that their populations were mainly mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage, which unfortunately they didn't want to teach it basically. As a result, the African influence was often ignored or minimized or erased. But in recent decades, there has been a growing movement to recognize Afro descendants, communities, and their contributions to the world. Today, people across Latin America are reclaiming their African heritage and celebrating their identity. So, you may ask yourself, why this history matters. So, I want you guys to take a look at this and understanding that Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous history reminds us that Black history is global. It's not just within the United States. It is global. It is not just in Africa. It is global. The African diaspora shaped cultures across the entire Americas. From the United States to the Caribbean to Latin America, African heritage has played a powerful role in shaping society. Recognizing these stories helps us understand the full picture of history, of Black history. Okay? The story of Afro-Latino and Afro-Indigenous communities is a story of resilience, culture, and identity. To me, it shows how people preserve their heritage and created powerful cultural traditions that still influence the world today. As always, do me a big favor. If you learned something new today, or even if you didn't learn something new, just make sure you like, subscribe, and you share this video so more people can learn these lessons and these stories. And like I said, if you already knew, let me know that. And I want you to do me another favor. Drop a comment below. Did you know about Afro-Latino and African Indigenous history before this video? This has been another episode of Let's Talk Black History with Tay Nicole. And I'll see you in the next episode. And as always, stay peaceful, stay blessed, and let's stay black, baby. Peace out.